Okay, so this is part of the distinct monthly event that we are hosting on the Science of Reading What I Should Have Learned in College. And it's based on the January publication that was launched this year. And that was all about speech to print. And so, or structured linguistic literacy. I'm just going to give a little background of what Distinct magazine is all about. It was launched in 2021 as a resource for families and educators of children and young people with learning difficulties. Not every dyslexic child is magically a genius. Oftentimes, parents spend hours looking for the genius or outside the box thinking in their dyslexic children, failing to realize that it was in them all along, hidden in plain sight under the years of self-doubt and shame that in society is ingrained in them for not matching up to their peers. Distinct aims to peel back at these negative layers of damaged self-esteem and provide children with a platform to truly appreciate their uniqueness, take pride in their differences, and revel in the knowledge that within their difference lies their strength. And so Distinct has a magazine platform that you can subscribe to. And Zara, I guess you would say the creator of this, who's online tonight with us, has graciously given us access to this for an entire year, free of cost. So tonight our speaker is Jennifer Newman. She's now I'm going to read her bio and then hand it off to her. An ASHA certified speech and language pathologist and licensed reading specialist, Jennifer Newman believes that structured linguistic literacy approaches offer an effective and efficient alternative for helping all students become proficient and confident readers and writers. Her volunteer literacy tutoring with a high school graduate who was functionally illiterate sparked her interest in learning how to teach reading, leading to training in Norton Gillingham and earning a certificate of advanced study in reading. Despite many hours of postgraduate professional development, the feeling that her instruction was still missing the mark led her to pursuing EBLI training, and she has been amazed by its impact on her students' progress. After many years working in schools, Jennifer is now a private tutor serving students in the suburban Boston area. When she isn't working, she enjoys walking, listening to podcasts, reading, and snuggling with her cats. Without further ado, Jennifer Newman.
Thank you, Donna.
You're welcome.
And thank you for arranging this monthly showcase. I think it's been amazing so far, and I can't wait to attend the upcoming events. And thank you, Zara, for extending the free access to the January issue throughout the duration of the showcase. It's really incredible. So as Donna mentioned already, if you haven't typed in the chat where you're joining from and what brought you here tonight, that would be terrific. And I anticipate there'll be plenty of time for questions and talk at the end. So as Donna already alluded to, I'm having a little technical glitch here. Hold on one moment. My slides are not advancing. Let's see what happens. Interesting. All right, did that work? Yep, okay, good. Interesting. Always something new. So I wrote this article for Distinct Magazine to describe how I came to using a speech-to-print linguistic phonics approach, and EBLI specifically, and to share some of the insights that I gained along the way. And throughout this journey, I've met and continue to meet many others who have traveled similar paths. And I know some of them are here tonight, and I hope they'll chime in with their insights as well. So as you can see from my roadmap, when I was in college, I majored in linguistics, and I became interested in the field of communication disorders and decided to enroll in a graduate program at Emerson College in Boston, where I'm from. And I had the privilege of learning from some exceptional teachers, among whom were Dr. Jerry Wallach and Dr. Anthony Bashir, who I really credit with developing my interest in the connection between language and literacy. I still have vivid memories. One very hot summer here in Boston, I think it was the hottest on record, of sitting holed up in my bedroom with our window air conditioner running at full steam, writing my graduate thesis on the efficacy of using Elkonin boxes for teaching phoneme segmentation to kindergarten students. And so you can see I've been thinking about the role of phonemes in reading for quite some time. I spent several years working as a speech-language pathologist in elementary and middle school settings. And I also spent some time working in a clinic with adults who were recovering from brain injuries. And as Dada mentioned in my bio, it was while I was home raising my own children that I did some volunteer literacy tutoring with an adult student who was functionally illiterate. He had graduated from high school. And this experience convinced me to pursue some additional training as a reading specialist, which culminated in Norton Gillingham coursework and a full year practicum. And so with this new focus, I jumped back into the world of schools as a literacy specialist. But I realized very quickly there was still a lot I didn't know. And especially as I expanded my role to include being a literacy curriculum coordinator. And so this started me down a path of perpetual professional development. I attended conferences, I read journal articles and books, and accumulated more training in specific programs and approaches for intervention in classroom instruction. And after a while, it felt like I was swimming in an alphabet soup of programs and acronyms. I was trying to piece together different elements and techniques to figure out what works best for each student, and this was a lot of work. And in my role as the curriculum coordinator, the feedback I kept getting from classroom teachers was there was never enough time to cover all these components that I was telling them they should cover. And so even though adjusting our classroom instruction was leading to some better student outcomes, we all agreed we were spending too much time planning, too much time analyzing data, and there were still too many students being referred for reading support and evaluations, and everybody was feeling pretty worn out. And when I think back on this time, I realized that the answer I was looking for was literally sitting on my bookshelf in some of these books. I had stumbled upon Diane McGinnis's book, Why Our Children Can't Read, and Carmen and Jeff McGinnis's book, Reading Reflex, during my volunteer adult literacy tutoring. But when I went on to do my training as a reading specialist, I really absorbed the idea that a Norton Gillingham approach was what was necessary for struggling readers. And at the time, I didn't really see the disconnect between Norton Gillingham and what I had read and Why Our Children Can't Read by Diane. And I can only imagine what a difference it might have made had Diane McGinnis's work been included in my training as a reading specialist, but I'll get back to that. So how did I eventually come to pursuing training in EBLI? It wasn't until I returned my focus to working directly with students that I noticed that too often Norton Gillingham was not closing the gap, even with years of intensive, high-quality intervention. And if after all my training as a speech and language pathologist and now reading specialist, I wasn't reaching all the students on my caseload, I knew I needed a different approach. So in my previous role as the curriculum coordinator, I had come across some EBLI webinars and some columns that Nora had written, and I was ready to find out if this approach could help me reach more students. So after 13 years as a literacy specialist, I consulted with a trusted colleague, and in the summer of 2020, decided to pursue the training in EBLI. With a mixture of feelings, I was curious. I knew that this was an approach based on Diane's work, and I was eager to dig deeper and finally learn what it was all about. Skepticism, would it really be that different from what I was already doing? Would it teach me things I didn't already know? And discomfort, because I saw right off the bat that it would require rethinking and reframing what I'd been taught in my Norton Gillingham training. So I began using EBLI with just one student that summer as I started to learn the training. And by the fall, I felt ready to use EBLI with all the students on my school caseload. And as I gradually became more comfortable with EBLI, I began to appreciate that linguistic phonics is based on a completely different paradigm than Norton Gillingham and other familiar phonics approaches. And I also began to notice that linguistic phonics differs in subtle ways from several of the speech to print approaches I had explored previously. So what was the shift and how is it different? I think there are three overarching elements that distinguish linguistic phonics: the schema used for instruction, the conceptual framework, the language used during instruction, and the methodology of the instruction. So I'm going to walk through what I mean by each of these. So all linguistic phonics approaches share the same instructional schema that was described by Diane McGinnis, and it's often referred to as her prototype. And this schema is what McGinnis discovered by analyzing our alphabetic code. And because of the complex, opaque orthography of English, if our goal is to help children unlock the code, we have to show them how it works. So all linguistic phonics approaches explicitly teach students the following concepts that are unique to the English alphabetic code: that 1, 2, 3, or 4 letters can spell one sound. A single sound can be spelled in multiple ways, and the same spellings can represent different sounds. And McGinnis's key insight was that the way a writing system is designed determines how it should be taught, which is why linguistic phonics is also referred to as speech to print instruction, not because it focuses on teaching and coding first, but because of how the entire schema for instruction is organized to show children how the symbols on the page represent the sounds they use to form words when they speak. And so I came across these two images and feel like they are a useful way to visualize the difference between how linguistic phonics organizes instruction compared to traditional phonics, including Orton-Gillingham-based approaches. So in the smaller cabinet on the left, the instruction is organized by phonemes. And when we use phonemes as the anchor or constant, the alphabetic code is reversible. And this organization not only reflects how our writing system was designed, but it also arranges what children need to learn in a manageable, well-organized, and finite package. Compare that to the sprawling file boxes on the right. I think these illustrate that when the organization of the instruction is by graphemes, so letters or groups of letters, the information becomes disjointed and unwieldy, and the code loses its reversibility, which means it no longer works as a code, because when you anchor instruction in letters and combinations of letters, you never get back to the 44 phonemes of English. And I think while some children will succeed in inferring how the code works regardless, many more will be left feeling that English is impossibly complicated and unpredictable when we do it that way. So that's the schema. Along with having a different schema, there are really some subtle but powerful differences in the language that we use for instruction that I think draw children's attention to the alphabetic principle, that letters are representations of spoken sounds. And these differences in language also increase student agency, that the sounds are coming out of their own mouths. So when a student is decoding, reading, or encoding, spelling a word, we would say things like, tell me the sounds, or what does your mouth say? What do your ears hear? Or how many letters spell this sound? And when a student is trying to decode a word like thread, and they mispronounce the EA spelling as E, we would acknowledge that EA can represent the E sound and prompt them with something like, try saying this spelling another way, or perhaps simply telling them the sound. They don't know it. So in addition to these subtle shifts in language, with phonemes as the organizing schema, there's less instructional verbiage. There's no need to label or categorize sounds with things like digraphs, R-controlled vowels, blends, glute sounds. There's no need to teach syllable types or spelling rules, exceptions to rules, or wordy memory tricks, none of which actually help students in the moment when they're stuck on a word. And I think these shifts in language are powerful because I've started to realize that as students internalize these prompts that they hear us saying, it helps to write, if they're very young and just learning, or if they're older, rewrite the internal self-talk that they use themselves when they get stuck. In other words, how they think about words when they're confronted with a challenge. And another benefit of eliminating all this extra verbiage is that it just reduces the extraneous noise in instruction. And I think this dramatically reduces the cognitive load for both the student and the teacher. And while this is clearly beneficial for all students, it's especially important for children with developmental language disorders and anyone with working memory issues who often struggle, both of whom often struggle to manage the language demands that are imposed by traditional phonics. And that brings me to the third element, which is the methodology of instruction. So EBLI focuses on using only high leverage, evidence-aligned practices and routines. And so rather than starting by teaching letters and sounds in isolation, EBLI integrates instruction in phonemic awareness, phonics, and handwriting by teaching these skills within the context of words from the start. Instead of using drills and teaching skills to mastery, EBLI relies on scaffolded instruction, interleaved retrieval practice, and immediate corrective feedback that helps students solidify their knowledge of the code. Students learn a consistent and reliable process to apply to decoding and encoding all words instead of print-based spelling rules, 6-syllable types, and a different set of strategies for learning high-frequency words with less common spelling patterns. And because of all this, students are able to learn and transfer their code knowledge at a much faster pace. So with EBLI, by adopting a linguistic phonics paradigm, my instruction has really evolved. I used to organize my instruction around first teaching students letters with associated keywords to help them recall the sound. I used to teach isolated skills in a carefully controlled sequence before integrating them. I used to focus on the visual aspects of print, teaching lots of rules and syllable types. And I was continuously searching for tips and tricks to help students remember why a spelling is what it is. Whereas now, my instruction is organized around teaching the most common spellings of the 44 phonemes or speech sounds in English. I'm able to teach multiple skills simultaneously, and I watch for mastery occurring over time. I focus on training my students to use a logical, consistent, and reliable process for reading and spelling within the context of familiar routines that lower their anxiety and draw their attention first and foremost to their mouths and their ears as they pull the words off the page with their eyes. And I think that along with these changes in what I do in my instruction, my thinking about my instruction has also evolved. So to quote another linguistic phonics practitioner who I recently heard speak at an amazing symposium, she said, using a linguistic phonics approach reorients your whole attitude of what reading involves. And that really spoke to me because I feel this reorientation for me has included a whole lot of decluttering of my toolbox so that I can focus on what's essential. It's helped me appreciate that small changes can have a dramatic impact on student learning. And most important, I now believe that all learners can achieve proficiency with foundational reading and writing skills, and they can do so much faster than I previously believed was possible. And so clearly I see these changes impacting my students' learning in many ways, but a few of them that are very noticeable. They're able to learn the code much faster. Their handwriting and spelling improves, whereas before I felt a little hopeless in terms of how to deal with their handwriting, and spelling always felt like a bugaboo. They're increasingly relying on decoding as their default strategy when they're reading. They're consistently more engaged during lessons, and they exhibit a lot less frustration and increased self-efficacy or agency when they're involved in reading and writing. And so I wanted to share a couple samples and talk about these students just a bit. So these are 2 writing samples from a student who has an IEP for a neurological disorder. And he also works with a speech language pathologist on articulation. He works with an OT. He works with a PT. And the image on the left is from the fall of his 2nd grade year when we first started working together. And you can see his writing, he shows limited output. He has significant difficulties with letter formation and placement, spacing and spelling, sentence structure, and just the general organization of his language. I hope you can read it. I see Nora squinting. And the image on the right is from the winter of grade 2, so not that many months down the road. And you can see already his increased output, his improved letter formation, better handwriting, spelling, conventions, sentence structure, and general language organization. And then I wanted to share some examples from another student. This is a 1st grade student who also has a very complex learning profile. And this is what she was reading with me in November of this year after we had been doing EBLI lessons for about 4 months. So I calculated correctly, it's about 30 lessons we had had together. And she had already come a long way. We started at the very end of her kindergarten year. So this is what she was reading in November. By January, the same student was now able to read Frog and Toad. And as of April, she was reading with a little support from me, a much more challenging early reader book that's part of the Mr. and Mrs. Green series. And you can see some of my marks on the text where I was helping her work through some longer words. So you're probably wondering why I'm showing you images of a gym and how this could be related to reading. But I've thought about this for a long time. The image on the left of the crowded, noisy gym is where I used to go. And it's also what my instruction felt like before I learned linguistic phonics and EBLI. Slow, laborious, time-consuming, effortful, and fragmented. The image on the right is of the quiet gym with the single streamlined smart trainer is what my instruction feels like now. It's fast-paced, it's coherent, it's efficient, it's effective, it's motivating, and most of all, it's fun. And I think the reason that teaching with EBLI feels this way is also because the instructional routines are distilled to the essential elements, which makes planning and teaching much, much easier. My head is no longer swimming with acronyms. My bookshelves are tidier because I no longer have to pick and choose from this program and that program to meet my students' needs. And I recently listened to a presentation from Dr. Mark Seidenberg, who proposed that we use the following 3 questions to help us evaluate our reading instruction. Is the instructional method effective in teaching reading? Is it efficacious? How much time does it take for how much benefit? Is it efficient? And does it work with children from varied backgrounds? Is it equitable? And when I think of my experience using EBLI and the experiences of many others who I've gotten to know who use EBLI or other linguistic phonics approaches, I have no trouble answering yes to each of these questions. But at the same time, I'm really aware that this is still only anecdotal evidence, and we really be nice to have more. So zooming out from what has changed for me personally since I learned about speech to print, linguistic phonics, structured linguistic literacy approaches, I think that while we've been mired in the balanced literacy phonics debate, we haven't noticed that we've been marinating in a print-focused approach to phonics for many, many years, which means that few people are even aware that there's an alternative route to foundational reading instruction that's efficacious, efficient, and equitable. So to wrap up tonight, I thought I would go just a step beyond where I left off in my distinct article and share some of my hopes for what lies ahead. I hope that we can acknowledge how our assumptions have restricted our vision of the instructional options available, and that instead of quibbling over labels, more people will explore what linguistic phonics approaches like EBLI have to offer. I hope we can use the noteworthy results from schools, classrooms, and individuals already using linguistic phonics approaches to encourage more empirical research to examine the efficacy of different approaches to phonics. These high-quality, large-scale studies are long overdue, and not just for linguistic phonics. I hope we can find ways to embed linguistic phonics training in teacher and specialist programs and develop linguistic phonics teachers who are already in the classroom so that all teachers have access to this information. And to paraphrase my colleague, Nikki Pratty, the founder of the amazing Speech-to-Print Linguistic Phonics Exploration Facebook group, if struggling parents and children can find success with linguistic phonics, imagine what it would be like if all children had access to this kind of instruction beginning in kindergarten. So thanks for listening. And I hope that everybody who's here tonight will continue to join us for the upcoming showcase discussions. I'm happy to answer some questions.
Thank you, Jennifer. You have a way about you that's amazing. That's all I have to say.
Oh, thank you.
Does anyone have any questions? Any thoughts?
Jen, you said that previously the 44 phonemes were not the center of your thinking when you were teaching all kinds of logic rules and ways to figure things out. And then the 44 phonemes began to kind of center you and guide you. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. I think, the big difference is just getting back to this whole idea of the schema. And so even though with, approaches like Orton-Gillingham, you're clearly trying to teach kids the connections, you're not doing it, the organization of how you approach it, it doesn't become obvious for children. You might start with short vowels, and then you might move on to some blends or some digraphs. And then at some point, maybe towards the end of first grade, you might start introducing some vowel teams, but you might only teach two, different ways to spell the sound A. And so kids are just kind of left, grasping, the connections just aren't clear. They're not clear for you as a teacher, and they're not clear for the student. I don't know if that answers what you were asking. And if somebody else wants to chime in, feel free. I'm seeing a question, I think, Donna, on the chat.
What was your average previous time frame for getting students to grade level reading versus now with EBLI?
Yeah, it's a good question. So in my recollection, it was really hard to get students to meet the benchmarks, with what I was doing before. They would just continue to lag behind. And, there might be some gains, but they really didn't get there. The gap was still there. And I think the feeling amongst the people that I worked with was that was just to be expected. These were the kids who were really challenged with reading, and it was going to take a long time, and we just had to stick it out, and they had to stick it out.
Here's a comment. You mentioned in the talk that you saw how small changes could have significant impact. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I think when I said that, I was thinking a bit about, just this shift in the paradigm. Seems like a small change, but has a huge impact. Shift in the language that I use when I'm teaching kids also, I think has a really big impact, and it's taken me a while to appreciate that.
Mhm.
And I think also just, what I focus on during instruction, and how even though it's, in many ways it feels like I'm doing less, I feel like I'm doing more.
Mm-hmm. Okay, here's one. Is this more of a method or a program? What first steps would you, oh, I lost it. Would you recommend for a newbie?
So is it more of an approach or a program? It's definitely an approach.
Mhm.
And what was the other part of the question?
What first steps would you recommend for a newbie?
So I think there are some excellent resources on the speech to print Linguistic Phonics exploration page that I would guide people to who want to start dipping their toes in. I would certainly recommend Nora's amazing EBLI webinars. Those are a good place to start, to just learn a little bit. That's how I started.
Yeah, I think you can get a really good sense of what it is by just going to the EBLI site and just watching all of her videos that are out there for free, or even a small fee. Some of those, there's some out there that she has too, her little workshops. Such a great resource to get you started. Here's a question. Can you talk more about how to teach spelling when there are so many options to spell one sound?
Sure. So spelling is still challenging. It doesn't come easily, but I think what's fun about it now is that you can talk to kids about the different options. When you teach them the patterns, you're going to be sorting the words, and you're going to be teaching them to look for the tendencies. Does this pattern typically come at the end of a word or the middle of a word or after a particular letter or sound? And it's really mostly it's giving them a way to draw their attention to the fact that there are these differences, and kids start to notice these patterns, I think, better when you talk about it that way, as opposed to teaching them a rule and then they have to remember that rule. They're not really as focused on the print patterns, I think, as they are when you teach this way. I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that.
I have a perfect example because we were just working on this today with my daughter, and we did OG for years, and nothing ever translated. So we would do sound and drill packs, and she never translated anything. And I'm taking her through EBLI. She's an excellent reader, but I'm taking her through with spelling. And today she was working on doing some mapping of the word satiated, which is, it's a complex word. And when she got to the T, in spelling satiated, she said, "Oh, that's usually it's the she said TI spelling, but this one's just T." And she's making those connections on her own because she's focusing on the sounds in the word. So as she was segmenting the sound, satiated, she could pull apart the T in this word, satiated. It isn't TI as it's the T and then the I. And she's had the very same conversations when she's spelling shun, like TION. I never know how to say it when I'm talking to adults, but I assume since you're all readers, you understand what I'm saying. But when she reads the word like conversation, she would automatically this way make that connection. Oh, the TI is making the sh sound. She never ever did that before in any other methodology that we tried. And I didn't point that out to her. She just was like, because she was doing the activity on herself, figuring it out on her own. And that is the beauty to me, that she was able to make that connection, that I didn't have to teach her a rule or anything. She's like, oh, there's another way of spelling this sound.
That's a great example. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Okay. How do we have conversations with colleagues who believe there is not sufficient evidence or research behind EBLI compared to other structured systematic approaches?
That's $1 million question.
It sure is.
Yeah, yeah. So I think, you know, what's so interesting to me about that question is that for the longest time, I felt that there was all this evidence behind all these other approaches. And yet there really isn't. You know, we have all the studies from the National Reading Panel that point us towards phonics in general, but we really don't have extensive high quality studies to support any of the other really popular approaches to teaching reading. So I feel like we're on kind of a level playing field. I would direct people to watch, I don't know if it's how available it's going to be, but my colleague Miriam Fine just did an excellent webinar on the Sounds Right Symposium that I would highly recommend, that talks about exactly that question.
Okay, very good. Here's a comment. Yes, I find EBLI deceptively simple in a good way. It is lighter and faster and also more effective. Thank you, Johanna. Let's see.
Hello.
Yes, Steve.
Hi, Steve Burden from Charlottesville. I'm a special ed teacher and I really connected to your article, especially because I've had all kinds of training also. Read every article I could possibly get my hands on, read by M. McGinnis a couple times. And I've worked with same kids for a couple of years and just felt like the tide hadn't turned. And I kept saying, according to the research and all these other things, I'm doing exactly what I should be doing, but it's happening like I was hoping and expecting. So when I started to discover EBLI and tried a few things that were presented in webinars, I found it to be so effective that I signed up for the training, went on Donors Choose, and one person sponsored the majority of the fees.
Oh my gosh.
So I just wanted to thank you for your article and for this. It's like, I feel energized. I don't know how many years I have left in public schools, but I feel really energized and I believe strongly it's going to be incredibly effective with the students I've been working with. So thanks.
Oh.
Oh, thank you. That's wonderful. That's great to hear.
Well, if it gives you any, I don't know, encouragement to stay working, I know a lady who's 69, I think, or 68. She should be well into her retirement and she won't stop teaching because she's so energized and she just got turned on to EBLI. So there you go. So just keep working. Okay, we got, oh my goodness, we got 15 more messages. Here we go. Steve, I feel your comment in my bones. I'm a special ed teacher as well. Okay. Oh, lots of love going your way, Steve. Okay, I think that's it for questions. You know, I think as I'm trying to think about how speech to print, how we've assumed, you know, reading is a visual process, but we know it's based on sounds and what we hear. And it was almost like the answer was right in front of us and we ignored it. Or we didn't make the connection, I guess.
Mhm.
So it's exciting to see this happening and the momentum that it's gaining. So it's exciting.
Well,
All right.
thanks for helping keep this momentum going. So
I'm trying. Okay, everyone, thank you for being here tonight, and watch for us next month. I have the date. It is June 27th. June 27th, mark your calendars, and our speakers will be, Julie is on, and Julie Van Leer and Amy Manning, and I think they're both here tonight. So yes, we're looking forward to hearing from both of you. All right, thanks everyone for being here. Good night.